The film begins in 2005 in Miami Beach, showing a 22-year-old man named David Pacus who works as a certified therapist. Even so, it turned out that David had been fired from his job 6 times and wanted to leave the profession for a long time. David is forced to survive to earn money, even though he often gets inappropriate treatment from some of his male clients, who often tease and disrespect him. Just like other visionary youths, David also has big aspirations to make large amounts of money. One day, David used all the money he saved to buy expensive bed linens and sold it to a nursing home, but it didn't seem to work to make a profit and instead cost him a lot. The other day, David was seen attending the funeral of his old friend, and there he saw his junior high school friend named Ephraim Diverley. So, Ephraim used to be a loser child who was often made fun of by all the students at school, and only David was the only person who wanted and was willing to be his friend. Therefore, Ephraim met David and asked him to come home after the funeral. While in the car, Ephraim explained that he had just been tricked and lost $70,000 by his uncle, so he planned to return to Miami Beach to start his own business. Ephraim explained the business mechanism he would work on was buying confiscated weapons from police auctions and selling them on the internet, aka black market, with a pretty lucrative profit. Before driving David home, Ephraim invited him to stop at the house of a cannabis dealer located in a complex of black gangsters. But when Ephraim got there, the seller wasn't home, so he asked a group of gangsters who were there. Ephraim then gave them some money to get some marijuana, but when he gave them the money, the gangsters ignored him and pretended not to hear him. Ephraim then tried to ask politely, but one of them showed a gun in his pants as a sign for him to leave immediately. However, he instead walked backward and opened the trunk of his car. Then he took out a rifle and immediately scared the gangsters. Seeing that, David felt amazed when he saw Ephraim, who seemed to teach him about life. When life hits someone, that person will fall to the ground, but not Ephraim, because when life hits him, he just hits back. After getting the marijuana, David and Ephraim smoked it together until they were drunk, and a few moments later, David returned to his rented house and was greeted by his wife, Is. His wife has a beautiful face and is a typical woman who is always grateful, even though she knows that David's income is not very high and he can only rent a simple house like the one they live in. Despite all of that, Is still feels very happy as long as David doesn't violate one standard rule, lying. The next morning, David was awakened by the happy and bad news, namely that Is was positively pregnant. On the one hand, he is happy but also stressed because all of his savings have gone for the business of sheets that have not sold a single one, so he was confused about where he could get money for childbirth. The scene changes, showing David and Ephraim in a restaurant. There, David looks dizzy with his household's economic problems, which makes Ephraim feel sorry for him. Coincidentally, Ephraim also needs a work partner to start his arms sales business, so he invited David to work with him. Ephraim did that not solely out of pity for David, but in Miami, he didn't trust anyone except David. Finally, David decided to accept his offer, but he reasoned to his wife that he and Ephraim were doing bed sheet export business which was sent to various countries around the world. For 6 months, David was taught everything Ephraim knew about their business. Ephraim also explained that he no longer buys weapons from auctions and sells them on the black market but from illegal weapons suppliers and hoarders. He then sells these weapons to the military and the government by seeking open tenders through sites on the internet. Ephraim could do this because, in 2005, there was a war in Iraq, and the American troops needed cheaper weapons, so he took advantage of this opportunity to earn a very big amount. Besides that, to get capital, Ephraim has a business partner named Ralph, a laundry entrepreneur with 14 branches throughout Miami Beach. The genius Ephraim could easily seduce Ralph and make him the main financier or investor to start his business. However, there is one thing that is brutal about Ephraim. He is a typical man who never minces words and knows no negotiations. This was proven when Ephraim and David were at the club. At that place, Ephraim seduced a woman who already had a partner by offering money so that the woman would go on a date and sleep with him at the hotel. But suddenly, her boyfriend appeared and immediately beat them. It turned out that the woman's boyfriend was a famous celebrity named Dan Bilzerian. While treating bruises, David suddenly received a call from Captain Santos, a United States Army captain currently fighting in Baghdad. Captain Santos asked for a Beretta type of weapon to be sent to Baghdad in very large quantities, which is certain that the sale this time has a profit 10 times greater than their sales for the past 6 months. Sometime later, when David was accompanying his wife for an ultrasound, he again received a call from Captain Santos asking about the weapons he ordered. Captain Santos asked whether the arms were Italian-made or not because, from the latest news, all shipping parties refused to accept Italian-made weapons to be sent to Baghdad due to the ongoing war conflict. David, who was panicking, immediately reported this to Ephraim, but Ephraim casually told David to stay calm because he already had a backup plan. Ephraim explained that he planned to send the weapons to Jordan, which is close to Baghdad, and they would send the weapons themselves from Jordan directly to Captain Santos, who was in Baghdad. The scene changes, showing Ephraim and David getting ready to finish their work at the airport. Sometime later, they arrived in Baghdad. Then they met someone who could help to transport and send their order to Baghdad. After agreeing, they were told to wait for 3 days until the preparations were finished. But Ephraim and David were surprised to know that they both had to send the weapons using a truck through a very dangerous war zone. Soon after, they were introduced to an amateur driver who he said had often made deliveries to Baghdad. However, because they both had no choice, David and Ephraim finally headed for the death zone. When night fell, their adrenaline began racing as an Iraqi military group was on guard. Luckily, the driver knew the way through by giving them 2 packs of Marlboro cigarettes so they could continue their journey. When they arrived at the war zone, they stopped at an abandoned gas station. At that place, the driver filled himself with empty gas from the remaining tank while Ephraim was urinating in the back, while David took the time to call his wife, who asked about him and the sheets he was selling. It turned out that David had lied about the trip. He confessed to his wife by saying he was on a business trip abroad to meet with several leading bed linen entrepreneurs. But suddenly, he saw 2 Iraqi army cars appearing from a distance. He immediately shouted at Ephraim, who ran towards the truck, and they stepped on the gas, leaving the driver. Seeing this, the driver immediately ran with his gas tank and managed to climb into the back of his truck. The atmosphere started to tense when Ephraim kept trying to speed up the truck, but the truck's gas had run out. At the same time, the driver started pouring gas into the truck's tank as he drove on. They had almost no chance of surviving the approaching Iraqi soldiers. But luck is still on Ephraim and David's side because American soldiers show up to help them, who have been desperate to enter the war zone for money. After that, they met with Captain Santos, and in the end, they both got paid around $3 million for selling these weapons. The scene changed, showing Ephraim and David, who had returned from Iraq and immediately bought 2 Porsches and 2 luxury apartments in cash without credit or loans. Not long after that success, Ephraim began to develop his company by giving it the official name AEY. When one of the applicants asked what AEY stands for, Ephraim answered there was no meaning and said that the name AEY was just a company name to make it sound more professional. The critical applicant then expressed his opinion that the company name should have meaning. Hearing this, Ephraim was annoyed, so he immediately kicked the applicants out of his office. He said that he didn't need such a critical employee. Then Ephraim asked the applicants whether there were any other questions, but they fell silent. 3 years later, David is seen holding his baby while working. Soon after, he saw a golden opportunity when he read an open tender worth hundreds of millions of dollars, which would have made him and Ephraim super rich. The tender does not require Beretta or small arms, but heavy weapons such as missiles and other heavy weapons. This was clearly not enough if they only relied on the internet and their previous network, so they went to class in Las Vegas, Nevada, to attend a weapons exhibition where the military and weapons manufacturers were present. With AEY's self-confidence and the company, which is still young, many people do not believe and are willing to work together with their company, so David and Ephraim failed to get the suppliers they wanted. After that, Ephraim chose to rest at the hotel while David went to the casino to refresh his brain. But at that place, David met a man named Henry Gerard, an arms dealer who was quite famous among arms dealers like them. David then goes to see Ephraim because Henry offers them an opportunity. After that, the 3 started chatting formally, and Henry agreed to help them by passing on his connections. Shortly after, David asked Henry if he had connections, why not do it himself? Henry then replied that he was currently on the terrorist watch list, which limited his steps. So when he saw that David and Ephraim wanted to do this business, it allowed him to make a profit simply by providing connections to his colleagues without having to go directly into the business. Sometime later, Ephraim and David arrived in Albania to meet Henry's colleague. Then they got a private driver named Bashkim, who took them directly to the warehouse where the Albanian troops' weapons supplies were kept by an unscrupulous soldier who was there. Shortly after, Ephraim and David arrived to meet the person and inspect the goods they would sell themselves. After arriving and meeting with the military personnel, they were shown the supplies in that place. David then asks whether the bullets are still working, and the soldier invites him to try. In the end, Ephraim and David agreed to make a cooperation contract, and thanks to that, their coffers of dollars were getting a lot. However, because he had no one to do the bookkeeping and he needed someone trusted to do it, David had no choice but to take care of the bookkeeping himself for their safety. 2 weeks later, Ephraim and David were invited by United States military purchasing officers to meet in person. However, due to a lack of confidence, they both decided to smoke marijuana to strengthen their minds when they met in person. During the meeting, the officers were both quite happy and surprised at the cheapness of their selling weapons. Ephraim then asked how cheap the weapons we were selling were, and the officer replied that the price at their company was $53 million cheaper than other companies. The scene then changes, showing his choosing to return to her mother's house after knowing the lies made by David. She finds a photo of David and Ephraim while in Iraq and some money under the sink. After that, David went to his office, and Ephraim realized that his wife was upset, so Ephraim tried to cheer him up by giving him a toy grenade with his name on it as a form of gratitude for his contribution so far. Sometime later, David was assigned alone in Albania for 8 months to oversee the shipment of AK-47 bullets in very large quantities. Luckily, Bashkim, the personal driver, still cared about him even though it was just sending him food. Unfortunately, the problem arose again when the bullets to be sent did not match what was requested or because they were made in China, and David saw that in the bullet box. David then contacted Henry, but Henry chose to just let go because he felt he was only an intermediary between them and the supplier without wanting to bother about where the bullets were made. This made Ephraim and David have to rack their brains to keep their orders delivered. Fortunately, there was Bashkim who had a friend who owned a packaging factory named Enver who could repackage AK-47 bullets into cartons and send them without any brands made in China. After that, Ephraim counts how much the cost is to pay Enver. However, they looked surprised because they both only had to pay around $100,000 to pack all the bullets to be sent, and that price was surprisingly much lower than it should have been. This is due to the reduced bullet weight, thus making the profit obtained much greater for shipping. One night when David was in Albania, Ephraim was back in Miami Beach. Suddenly, Ephraim called him, who said that Henry had been sneaky by taking more profit from the contract because it should be noted that their business with the Albanians was still under Henry's control. Ephraim said that one bullet was bought by Henry at a low price but was sold to him at a much higher price, making Ephraim angry and not accepting it. Moreover, Ephraim is a person whose name is greedy, so he certainly doesn't stay silent and plans to terminate his contract with Henry and then intends to find another producer. Hearing about the plan, David tried to calm Ephraim's anger by saying that they could still profit from the cheap cost of shipping weapons. Besides that, he said that he was currently in Albania, and if Ephraim broke his contract with Henry just like that, the Albanians and Henry's men might become angry and look for them. Afterward, he asked Ephraim to stay calm and not be greedy for everything. Finally, he agreed. But when David was fast asleep, suddenly, several masked people appeared and took him to a place to meet Henry. The man apparently felt offended by Ephraim's threat to break his contract, so David had to become a victim of his selfishness, who apparently didn't listen to his advice and chose to fight Henry. Luckily, Henry didn't kill David and only left him battered. But after that incident, David decided to return to Miami Beach and went straight to his to apologize and say that he would quit this high-risk business. He also went straight to the office to meet Ephraim and asked for his share because he had decided to leave and quit the business he was running. As David leaves, Ralph appears and offers to mediate between himself and Ephraim. The scene then shows David, Ephraim, and Ralph at the restaurant for mediation. Initially, the mediation went well until Ephraim again showed his selfish nature when he agreed to give David's share but with a very, very small amount and in installments. Hearing this, David was fed up and revealed all of Ephraim's secrets to Ralph. He said that Ralph's profits were still far from theirs because Ephraim had been manipulating the profits only for his own interests. The next day, when David was with his wife and their baby, Ephraim came to visit his house to apologize and, at the same time, invite him to come back. But suddenly, the FBI appeared and arrested them, which turned out to be because Ephraim had never paid Enver, the packaging factory owner. So Enver made him report this deception to important people in the United States. It exposed every bad thing he did and made everyone involved arrested and sentenced to prison according to their mistakes. For his actions, Ephraim was sentenced to 4 years in prison, while David only got 7 months of home confinement for pleading guilty and being cooperative. Meanwhile, Ralph, the financier, was also jailed, but not as long as Ephraim, because when the mediation was being held, he deliberately brought a recording device with him so that he could escape just in case he faced a situation like this. The film ends by showing that 7 months have passed, and David has returned to his old profession as a therapist. At this time, he is heading to his client's room in a luxury hotel, and it turns out that his client is Henry, who had deliberately called him to discuss something. At that place, Henry was quite surprised and indebted because David did not mention his name during the examination process. David then explained that he really had no reason to mention Henry's name. He also said that he was not a vengeful person. Hearing this, Henry intends to return the favor as a sign of his gratitude by giving him some money from the last sale, which is enough for him to stop being a therapist and start a new, better business. The film ends. We can take so many moral messages from this film, like the character Ephraim, who makes us realize that greed will only destroy all our efforts. Meanwhile, David's character teaches us that no matter how cleverly we hide lies, these lies will be exposed as well. And the character Henry, at the end of the film, shows an attitude of always being grateful and returning favors for all the good deeds that other people have done for him.